What's good, y'all? In today's video, I'm gonna be going over how to create a Bape-inspired camo pattern in a couple simple steps using Procreate and my supply pack. So let's jump right into it. So first things first, let's create a new canvas, and we're going to select a size of about 4,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels and press create. And then for our next step, we're going to want to find a texture that we can use for the base of our camo design. So for that, I usually use a cloud texture generator search on Google, and I found this image here. So I think this one will work just fine. And we're gonna just copy that and allow paste right onto our canvas. So we see it comes in on our canvas a little small, and we're just gonna wanna fit it to the canvas and make sure that there's no white edges on the outside. So we'll just expand it a little bit more so it fills our whole canvas up. So now that we have our base texture, let's go ahead and duplicate this layer. And then we're gonna set this layer to hard mix from our transparencies menu. So when we do hard mix, it should look something like this. It shows a clear separation between our darkest parts of our image and our lightest parts. So now from here, let's merge these layers together. So now what we want to do is try and remove all of the black shapes from this image. So let's go ahead and click, and it should start turning the things white, and it should be a light outline around kind of the things that you're selecting. We just want to select all of the black shapes. You don't have to get all of them, but just make sure you get the biggest ones for sure. And now that we have most of those selected, let's go to our arrow tool and then just drag that right off the screen. So as we can kind of see here, there's like a light outline on all of these. So let's go ahead and fix that really quick. So we're gonna go to this layer here, and we're gonna set it to alpha lock. Let's just choose a big brush, and we're gonna make this one black. And we're just gonna go over all of these things. Okay, so now that we have our black and a transparent background, so we see obviously there's no background on this, we're going to want to create our background for our camo design. For this, I'm thinking a nice sandy color, something in this area. I think looks pretty nice. So we'll call this our base layer. We can call this first layer that we created our black layer. So I think this is already starting to kind of come together. We're gonna duplicate our black layer. For this design, I'm thinking about doing 4 colors. So our next color is gonna be a dark, actually we'll call this our dark green layer. And it should already be selected to alpha lock based off of our duplicate. So we're just gonna go over this one and color all of that in. So we see all the blacks turn to green, and we have our dark green layer and our black layer. We're going to go to our arrow tool and then just rotate 45 degrees until we get it going the opposite direction. So it should look something like this. And then now I'm gonna duplicate this one more time. And from here, we're gonna go for a nice reddish tan color. So we'll call this our tan, just to give this a nice bit of contrast. So let's find a color that looks good for that, something in that area. So now we're just gonna color over all of this tan. Now that we have this covering our dark green layer, we're going to do a horizontal flip. Let's do a vertical flip as well. So we're gonna take this tan layer and move it underneath our dark green layer. And then let's do a horizontal flip from here. And let's put it at the very bottom. So I'm just gonna shift this around some in the background. I think something like that looks pretty good. And we see now that the texture is really coming together, this organic kind of camo we're creating here. And we're gonna do one more layer, and this is gonna be our lighter green. Maybe something like that. I think looks pretty cool. So now we have this lighter green, so let's call this light green here. So from here, we can kind of rearrange some things so we can get our texture a little bit more even. Since we have all of these layers here, we can kind of rearrange things in any way that we'd want them. So this is what my final kind of design looks like. So now we're going to group all of our layers together, and then we're just going to duplicate this group, and then we're going to flatten it. Now that we have our design here, what we want to do is use the uniform transform tool to shrink the design down to size. And I'll just put it in one of the corners for now, because we're going to end up duplicating these designs and then just filling in this square with our design. What I usually do, like I said, is just duplicate them, and should leave something like that. And then we can merge these two together and then duplicate this as well. And then just do like flips and any kind of way that you want to lay these patterns out. But we want to make sure that we're creating as seamless as a pattern as possible. So I think that looks pretty good. So we already see now that our texture, our pattern is really coming to life here, and we're going to merge these two together. So now I know this was called our base layer, but let's just call this our pattern. So now that we have our pattern here, we want to create a new layer, and we're gonna find a mock-up that we want to put this pattern onto. So for me, I'm gonna look for a mock-up that has some fall kind of energy to it. So I'm gonna go with the front sweater mock-up, and I'm just gonna make sure that my design is completely lined up to the middle of the screen. So now that we have that, let's call this our base layer. We're gonna duplicate this one time, and we're gonna call this top layer our outline. And now let's lock our outline layer and go back to our base layer. So when I usually do patterns like this, I like to use for the base layer the same color as whatever our pattern was. So for this design, that color was that light tan color. So let's go ahead and select that. And then we're just gonna drop that right onto our canvas. So then from here, we have our color. So let's name this our color layer. And we're just gonna merge our base and our color layer together. So that's just 2 fingers and a pinch, and it'll merge them together. So as we see here, the color and our base are on one layer, and we want to get rid of our background so we can really just see what we're working with on our actual mockup. To do that, let's go to our selection tool, then our automatic selection tool, and then just tap once in the background. And as we see here, the background turned a different color. So that means that our background is currently selected, and that's what we will be removing. So now we're just gonna go to our arrow tool here, and then just drag it right off the screen. Now back to our pattern here. So now we have our pattern in the background, and what we want to do is put our pattern, of course, above our mockup. So it should be covering it like this. And we see here that it's going over, and we want to make sure that it's just selected to our mockup. So to do that, we'll go to our pattern, and then we'll click clipping mask, and we see here it's automatically clipped to our design now. So now that we have our pattern here selected, what we can do is go ahead and resize it a little bit so it fits on our mockup a little bit better. So now that we have our pattern selected, let's go ahead and make this mockup look a little bit more realistic. So what I like to do from here is go to our pattern layer and then select a mask. Now that we have our pattern here, everything looks good. We're just gonna go through and add some detail in. And now we're gonna create a new layer, and this is gonna be our shadows layer. So we're gonna make sure our shadows layer is selected to drawing assist, and also that we have our symmetry drawing guide enabled. So that allows us, anything we do on one side, it copies over to the other side. And that's gonna make creating shadows and adding textures so much easier. So let's go through and add in some shadows. And I usually like to start on the sides of the design and then just kind of go along that edge. And that's really dark, so let's go to our layers and turn the opacity down on this a lot. So we'll leave it at about 40, and then we'll rename this our shadows layer. So I'm just gonna go through and finish out adding in some shadows or some extra detailing. I think that looks pretty good. So while we're here, let's add a light wash to our design as well. So for that, I use the brush pack, and I select the rough wash brush and make sure that's selected to drawing assist as well. And I'm gonna select a lighter off-white color and then just lightly go over the entirety of our design. I think that looks really cool, but I'm gonna go back through and erase some of that just so we can soften it up in certain places. And now that we have all of that, let's just go through and create a quick design to throw on this as well. And I'm just gonna do SPLY, and I'm gonna do that in a font called Freshman, okay? So now that we have that, let's change our color to something a little more vibrant. So I'm thinking some kind of yellow color, like a yellow like that. And we're gonna make this large. And I'm gonna show you a quick tip of also how to warp this text into an arch on Procreate. First, what I like to do is, of course, we have our text here, and we're gonna go to our warp tool there, and then we're gonna start in the middle of our design, and we're just gonna pull up from the top. So we're gonna pull up this pretty high like that. And then we're gonna go to align this second line here, and we're gonna pull up from there as well. So we see it's already creating that arch. And of course you can tone it down. I think something like this looks pretty good though. So now that we have that, let's move this to where we want it. And we're gonna go to our acid wash brush, and we're just gonna go through and kind of go around the edges just to really soften this design up so it really blends in. And we can see that speckled kind of texture. Looks really cool on it as well. So now that we've created our sweater design, let's go ahead and group up all these items, and we'll call this our sweater group. And then as always, we want to make sure that we're getting the most out of these designs we're creating. So let's go ahead and hide that. And now based off these designs, I'm thinking this would look really cool with a hat. So I'm going to do a new layer and then select our cap 1 front, and then just place that right onto our canvas. And then I'm just going to upsize that to the area that I think looks nice. And we're going to run through those same steps quickly of how we design any of our mockups. So now what we can do is go through and get our pattern from the sweater, and we're just gonna copy that and paste that right onto our hat design. So as we see here, again, it's covering our entire mock-up. We want it to just cover our hat, so let's click on that and go clipping mask. And here, I think we're gonna resize this too, make it a little bit larger, find a nice area that we want to work with. I think that looks pretty good. For this, I think the brim of the hat would look best probably in this olive green color. Create a new layer and then just clip it, and I'm just gonna color right over this brim. Okay, so now we have that. We're gonna open up our sweater layer again, and then just grab this yellow supply logo that we created a little bit earlier, and then copy and paste that onto our hat. So it'll look something like that. And then the last thing I would probably do for our hat is just add in some shadows. So let's do that quickly. So I'm just gonna go around the edges here, some kind of on the brim, just to really show the 3D nature of the designs that we're creating. And I think that looks pretty good. So now let's just group all of our hat layers together. So now we have our sweater design and our hat design. And also, before we finish up here, a quick tip is to go to our pattern layer, and then you can go to adjustments up here and then click hue, saturation, and brightness. And from here, we can start playing around with any kind of colors, any kind of saturation, the brightness, the darkness. You can get so many different variations. This is really where you want to get creative with things. And I think for me, that's why it really helps to start at our base, because from our base, it makes creating wild and crazy colors so much simpler. So for this one, I'm gonna find a cool color. I think that bluish purple looks really nice. And then we'll also go to our supply design, our adjustments again, and we can change this hue and saturation as well. And then of course, we can do the same thing with our hat. And just like that, we were able to create an entirely new design in less than 30 seconds just based off all the work we've already done. And that's really how I like to work, by really maximizing the things I can do with any of the designs that I'm creating. Based off the standard camo we were able to create a little bit earlier, these are our alternate colors, and then I have our main colors here. So let's just resize this, make this look nice. And yeah, if you liked the video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all those good things. There's also a lot that we didn't go over. Make sure you leave a comment below of what you want to see more of, and I got y'all with that. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.